Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Roman Lishchishin, and as Mike said, I'm from Coventry. I'm a member of the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain, Coventry branch, and I think maybe throughout the presentation I'll say a little bit more about the organisations of Ukrainians in Great Britain. I really want to say a big thank you to everybody in Warwickshire for helping Ukrainians. Your generosity has been amazing, and we will be eternally grateful for the help that you're giving us. So thank you very much. My chosen topic is, or the lead to my presentation, is a diverse history, diverse people, and shared identity. There will be, obviously, as Mike said, opportunities for questions later on. So if you do ask about cooking, I shall pass that all over to Maria Tarnowska to talk about food. I just like eating the stuff rather than making it. Anyway, so the Ukrainians, a diverse history, diverse people, a shared identity. And I want to just show you this slide to show you how close Ukraine is from the UK. It takes 3.5 hours to fly from Ukraine, London to the capital of Ukraine, Kiev. If you're flying to Lviv, which is in the western Ukraine, it takes you 2.5 hours. We are incredibly close to each other now with travel, etc. Next slide, please. So I've done a bit of history. You could, if you're really interested in history, there's plenty of stuff on YouTube about history. It's not all easy to understand, but if you're interested, have a look at the history of Ukraine on YouTube. What I want to cover is more the recent history, the sort of things that people may say to you, your guests may say to you or refer to in conversations with you. First slide. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is Ukraine's official boundaries, and the arrows are pointing to towns and cities which are in the news as we speak. So Kyiv, the capital, Kharkiv, which used to be the capital of Ukraine before it moved to Kyiv, Mariupol, which is having a terrible time, and also then we've got Kherson in the south. So that's that is Ukraine's official boundaries. They include Crimea. When people speak about Ukraine, they usually refer to this. So when they say central Ukraine, they're talking about that area around Kiev, Zhytomyr, Poltava, that's central Ukraine. South Ukraine is the bit near Crimea. It also includes Odessa, a port city, and then we have on the west we have Lviv, and on the right hand side we have East Ukraine, bits of which were occupied by Russian forces and proxies in 2014, and that's where most of the heavy fighting is currently going on. Thank you. Next slide. Right, I wanted to show you what Ukraine looked like before the First World War, and this explains, this is a kind of to show you the diverse history. As you can see, most of Ukraine and where Ukrainians lived was in the Russian Empire and had been for 200-300 years. But there were parts of Ukraine which were in the Romanian Kingdom. The Austro-Hungarian Empire were the main players. So the Ukrainians lived under the Austrians, the Romanians, and the Russian Empire. So that's before the First World War. Then the First World War, the empires collapsed. Various, all the different nationalities tried to get independence for their states, and most were successful. Ukraine wasn't successful, but here on this map you see that the USSR basically replaced the Russian Empire, Romania continued, so Ukrainians continued to live within Romania. Western Ukraine came into the new Polish state, and those bits of Ukraine in the Transnistrian or Carpathian region that came into the Czechoslovak Republic. So that shows you how, again, that's kind of the interwar years. Next slide. Right. I wanted to give you some key events up to the First World War. So as I mentioned, 1918, there was a bid for independence, there was a war, there was a civil war, there was an international war in Ukraine, and in 1921 the USSR was established. So the Red Army took over most of Ukraine and established the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The first 10 years were, I kind of hesitate sometimes in saying this, but it looked promising. There was a lot of hope that in that first 10 years that things were going to be improved, and we had a lot of people that had been displaced by the war, politicians, academics, writers, who thought actually Soviet Ukraine seems pretty good, and they emigrated or re-entered into the Soviet Ukrainian state, and they lived there, they worked there, they began to create there, and there was a bit of a golden age. Ukrainian language blossomed, Ukrainian culture, etc. And a lot of decision making in this USSR at that time was localized. So it was local politicians, local Communist Party activists making decisions. However, that changed quite remarkably or significantly in the 1930s, and we then had a number of events. We had the Red Terror, which basically lots of people were then, any prominent people with a history of opposition or potential threat to the new Soviet state were imprisoned, arrested, imprisoned, executed. In 1932-33, we had the Holodomor famine, which was an artificial famine which killed various figures, but I think 6 million is the figure that's most often quoted, but you do hear figures up to 10 million. And what happened was products were taken away from Ukrainian farmers, rather, put it slightly differently, Ukrainian farmers were told they must deliver certain quotas of grain, potatoes, etc., etc. If they didn't deliver this, then basically the troops moved in and took away all their foods, and these quotas were unachievable, and as a result of that, many people died of hunger. This wasn't the only famine mass kind of atrocity that was going on. Kazakhstan also suffered badly, and other places, but for Ukrainians, the Holodomor is a significant event in that period of history. In 1939, I've called this war Part 1 because, as you will know, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany and their allies, they invaded various countries in Eastern Europe, including Poland, and part of that. Those bits on the west of Ukraine that you saw, what we call Western Ukraine or North Bukovina, which we call the Romanian bits, were incorporated into the Ukrainian Soviet state, 1941, and the similar patterns happened where people began to be arrested, priests began to be arrested, executed, and you all remember the fate of the Polish citizens, the Katyn massacres, the soldiers and the academics, of which there were many Ukrainians because Ukraine was part of Poland there. That's part 1. Part 2 was when Nazi Germany then turned onto the Soviet Union, and we then had that war. All of Ukraine was under Nazi occupation, and we all know about the Holocaust, and in Ukraine, I think in Eastern Europe, it's called the Holocaust of bullets, because people were Jews and other people were just killed with, shot rather than gassed. I jump a little bit to 1954, because in 1954 Stalin died. A lot of people who had been exiled to Siberia, etc., were allowed to come back home, were free from concentration camps, and were allowed to come home. For example, my family was exiled to Siberia in 1946, and my cousins were born in Siberia. But in 1954, there was a relaxation, and some people came back. People came back much later, in the 60s. So some of my family didn't come back until the 60s. I mentioned 1954, the Crimea, because the Soviet Union was, and I think Khrushchev was in charge. They were trying to work out how best to support Crimea as an economy, and the decision was made. Crimea fits better under Ukraine because borders are there. The sort of the links are there in terms of rivers, etc. And Crimea became an autonomous area within Ukraine. 1960s and 70s, again, there was a dissident movement, and it was kind of partly provoked by a kind of tightening of the screws by the Soviet government. And you'll remember Solzhenitsyn and his book, and he was a dissident. There were many dissidents. There were Jewish dissidents, Ukrainian dissidents, Russian, Belarusian, all sorts of dissidents were trying to oppose this sort of tightening of the screws and what looked like a reversal back to Stalinism, etc. So that's kind of this. So the dissidents may be mentioned. A lot of Ukrainian writers were imprisoned in that period, and some died in concentration camps and camps, whatever. The next big event is the invasion of Afghanistan, where the Soviets invaded Afghanistan to basically change the regime change, and they were bogged down there for 10 years, and boys from Ukraine and the other countries of the Soviet Union were sent there and came back in zinc coffins. So Afghanistan is quite a significant event for people that have come from Ukraine. Then if you're finding conversations, it may be their fathers or their uncles served in Afghanistan. The next big event was Chernobyl. 1986. I think we've just marked its. I think last couple of weeks ago was the sort of anniversary of it being blown up, or the atomic station blowing up. But that's a big event. Lots of people moved out from the surrounding areas. Lots of concerns about radioactive poisoning and things like that. The next two bits you'll be aware of: Perestroika. Gorbachev came in, said, basically we need to change the system. We can't carry on as we are. Tried, kicked off some changes, and there was an attempted coup to try and stop those changes happening. I was in Ukraine at that time. It was quite interesting because I was there with my family. I arrived there and turned on the radio, and there's a coup. I'm thinking, what's going to happen now? Anyway, this is how Ukraine looked before, how Eastern Europe looked before the coup. So as you'll see, the dark line is the sort of the border boundary between the Warsaw Pact and sort of Western Europe or NATO or whatever. That's the boundary. And after the coup and the fall of the Iron Wall, that all collapsed, and we are back to independent states, Ukraine, Belarus, etc. So since 1991, this is the last sort of 20, 30 years, we're celebrating 30 years of independence. We had the 1991, Ukraine declared its independence. Key events there, people will know, we'll talk about this, the Orange Revolution. That was a sort of a protest which turned into a revolution, called a revolution, but it was around falsification of electoral results, and I was an election observer on the rerun of that election, and it was the pro-Western candidate won that and took over the country, as in began to run the country. So that's 2004. We then had another revolution in 2013, which is the Maidan Revolution, or sometimes called the Revolution of Dignity. That was provoked by the president, the president at the time, Yanukovych, reversing the path towards integration with Europe. Everything from 2004 onwards had been set up that Ukraine would become part of Europe, and people were seeing this move towards Europe as a way of getting good standards in place, good standards for running the economy, good standards for law, good standards for government, etc. It was kind of like a template that Ukrainians were aspiring to. And then the president at that time said, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to have closer links with Russia. And that then developed into a revolution. Mass protests in Kiev and around the country. There was the shooting of the protesters in 2014, and the President Yanukovych fled the country with his art collection, and that sort of put the end to that. But what happened then was the Russian forces and proxies used that opportunity to seize Crimea, parts of Donetsk and Luhansk. And then I make a big jump because then, you know, there's a war been going on since 2014 on that. And in 2019, President Zelensky was elected, and he's the current president. And I just wanted to some key things. So 1992, Ukraine played its first UEFA FIFA match. 2014, Ukraine won the Eurovision Song Contest. Ruslana won that with Wild Dances. 2013, Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev at the moment, won the championship, World Boxing, I think, WBC, I don't know what the C, I forgot what the C means, WC Championship, Boxing Championship. And then in 2016, we had another Eurovision song winner, Jamala, who she represented Ukraine, but she has links to Crimea and the Tatar people. So a little bit about music. Now, when you talk about Ukrainian music, people very often quickly zoom towards folk music. So I thought, well, I'll show you something different. Ukraine's got a very vibrant music history and offer to people. So going around the top, we've got Oke and Elzi, a very popular band, been around for quite a while. Ruslana in the bottom left, she's the winner of the Eurovision Song Contest. Top right, I've got a jazz person there, so you've got Ukrainian jazz. Then we have Baroque music, classical music, Dmitry Bortnyansky. In the middle at the top, it's called the Best of Boombox. They've been around for a while, but boombox have become very popular in the last 6, 8 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, extremely, because their lead singer was not only did he sing has re-sung a very popular song, which is, you know, trending all over the world, but he was also injured as well, and so he's become a celebrity for that as well. And in the bottom, Dacha Bracha, who, you know, this is kind of like a weirdo folk group. They're very good, bit worth listening to. The Bracha Sisters, or the Dacha Bracha Sisters. It's an interesting experience. The next, I thought I'd show you some. These are sort of the more traditional stuff. Top left, we have a fiddle and the dulcimers. The bottom right, we have the long, we call it a trembita, but it's like a long alpine horn. Top right, we have a minstrel playing the hurdy-gurdy. There are variations, there are different hurdy-gurdies. There's a Ukrainian type of hurdy-gurdy. I personally very like hurdy-gurdies, but we've got hurdy-gurdies. I put the choir picture there as well, because that probably is, you know, if you had, is there a national Ukrainian instrument? Well, I'll show you one in a minute, but the other one is choir singing. Ukrainians do like singing. And there is the Ukrainian national instrument. It's called the bandura. people call it like the harp or something, and I'm hoping we're going to hear how it sounds.
Can I just check if you can hear that?
I can't hear it yet.
Okay, no problem. I'll just reshare my screen with the sound. Bear with.
So I appreciate I'm moving very quickly, but right, thank you very much. That's so that's B&B project, bandura, the stringed instrument, and bayan is the button accordion. This particular group, B&B project, has some very interesting music and videos on YouTube. You know, if you have time, please do go and have a look at it. My next one is a bit about dance. Now, you've all seen Cossack dancing, etc. I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but I wanted to show you this picture. There you are. I think you might recognise the people there. This is, I don't know, come back. 10, 20, 30 years ago. But this is these are our friends from Derby, the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain, Derby branch, and they had this visitor who volunteered to try some Ukrainian kick dancing. So there he is. While we're on this, I just perhaps ought to say a bit about the branches. Our parents, or my parents, arrived here after the Second World War. We didn't have a lot of people come to the UK, but they did live in a very concentrated communities. So mainly where factories were. So the people in Coventry lived in the sort of Coventry area because we had Courtaulds factory, we then had the Jag, and we had people like that. So we have these branches. We have a branch in Coventry, Leicester, Derby, Nottingham, Wolverhampton, Gloucester. These are kind of the Midlands area. Interestingly, we don't have a branch in the Birmingham area. So I think that's how we're split up. Okay, but there's Ukrainian dance, a costume and a Cossack. Right. Okay. A bit about language. This is okay. So that this diagram here shows you distance between different languages. So there's Ukrainian. If you look at the distance between the different languages, Ukrainian and Polish, there's an indice there of 30. Ukrainian to Russian is 38. So in terms of grammar, in terms of language, phraseology, Ukraine is closer to Polish than it is to Russian. It's very close to Belarusian there. You see Bel, that's Belarusian. So it's very close. And I know when I hear Belarusians speaking, I can understand them, and I can read Belarusian, and if I read Belarusian, it sounds to me like Ukrainian. The other languages that are on there are Bulgarian, Slovak, again quite close to Ukrainian, 34. Czech is 38, a bit further, and then we have the sort of the languages from Yugoslavia, what used to be Yugoslavia, Slovenes, the Bosnians, the Macedonians, the Croats, Serbs. That shows you where Ukraine fits into sort of the language map and it's a Slavic language. The thing about Ukrainians is they read exactly what they see. It's phonetic, and they write exactly what they hear. So an A is an A, an E is an E, a T is a T, and an M is a M, and they don't change, right? But Ukrainian is a Syriac language, and so we have letters there that denote different sounds. Some look like Latin, so A looks like in Latin, the O's and M's are the same, T's are similar. But there are letters there that you will not be familiar with, but they are sort of Ukrainian Cyrillic. And I wanted just to illustrate how Ukrainians read and think. So the word cheese, Ukrainians would split it into its three sounds. There's a ch, an I, and a z, and it would be written ch, I, z. Those three letters at the end, that's cheese. So that's how Ukrainians hear, write, and speak. Interestingly, cheeseburger. Now this has been so burger would be split into two sounds, bur and gur. So two sounds. Now. In Ukrainian, it was interesting. There's a U there for burger, and I've heard different pronunciations of burger in Ukrainian. I've heard burger, berger, and berger. So, because Ukrainians don't have the sound as in burger, So, interesting. Last 2 days, I've been teaching a friend of mine about this sound and getting her to repeat, because urban, there's an there, dithering, so that's kind of a sound that doesn't exist in Ukrainian, and Ukrainians will either change it for an o, an I, or an e, or an e. So if that's an interesting conversation when you talk about cheeseburgers, and you also cheeseburgers. Ukrainians also, and this is again some kind of different. One word one complex sound, one thing. So a cow, that sound cow, in Ukrainian is korova, and a korova, that sound is always cow, right? It doesn't change. So now there's a hare. Oh, and we have hare, and here, similar. So Ukraine, or we have look, and two, and two. So in English, this is quite confusing to Ukrainians. They hear a sound and they think, what does it mean? And there's obviously, in English, we have the same sound meaning completely different things. Hare and hare is not the same. Here, I've put in there because it sounds similar. Look, two, and two. Yes, so what do you mean? So just, it's something to be aware of, and no doubt you'll have lots of endless fun, trying to get people to pronounce things properly and to understand things. I think it's all about trying to understand it from the context. But if they're reading something, it needs to be probably explained. Next. Oh, a bit about religion. Okay, next, please. Okay, Ukraine is predominantly a Christian country. Obviously, we have people who are agnostics and skeptics and not, don't follow a faith. But of the people who follow a faith, most of those are Orthodox. And by Orthodox, what would we say is they don't owe allegiance to the Pope, but they owe allegiance to a local patriarch or a patriarch of the Eastern churches. And there are three. This is 2015. Things have changed a little bit. The Ukrainian Orthodox Autocephalous Church has merged with the Ukrainian Orthodox Kiev Patriarch, and now we have two Orthodox churches, one which owes its allegiance to a Ukrainian patriarch, and the other one that owes allegiance to the patriarch in Moscow. It is a dwindling organization given the war, and people are saying, we are shifting allegiances and saying, well, no, our parishes are moving over to the Kiev Patriarch. Besides the Orthodox, there's the Ukrainian Catholic Byzantine. So most of the people in Coventry were Ukrainian Catholics Byzantine faith. If you walked into an Orthodox Ukrainian church or a Catholic Ukrainian church Byzantine, you wouldn't tell the difference. The vestments are the same. The church service is very similar. The only difference is the Ukrainian Catholics owe allegiance to see the Pope as the head of the church. Roman Catholics, they again, the Pope is the head of the church. If you go into a Catholic church in Ukraine, it's very similar to Catholics here, where you'd have spoken masses, the vestments are very similar, etc. So that's kind of on the sort of that side of it. We've got Protestant groups, Seventh-day Adventists, Lutherans, Baptists, lots of those, Jehovah's Witnesses, who have been really quite badly repressed in eastern Ukraine under the Russian occupation. But there's the Protestants, and then we have the Muslims, the Jews, and the Buddhists. And what I can say is certainly in the last 10 years, irrespective of your sort of religion, irrespective of whether you're Jewish or a Muslim, Tatar or whatever, there's a very strong Ukrainian identity and a feeling of Ukrainians together. And here's a picture of the people that sort of the heads of the church gathered. I can see the head of the Muslims. There's the rabbi of Kiev there, and we've got the Orthodox Kiev Patriarch and the Ukrainian Catholic there as well. So that's kind of a picture. The next picture, I quite like this. This is Rabbi Blech and his family. He's a rabbi, okay, and they were a couple of years old, that picture, but they're all dressed in Ukrainian national costume, Cossacks, it's a very interesting picture, very nice picture there, him and his family. And I think that's probably, yes. So these are kind of icons that you need to be aware of. So I can't just pick people's icons associated with Ukraine. Top left-hand corner is the Ukrainian trident. That's the Ukrainian national symbol. It's a trident. It goes back to King Volodymyr's time. Top right, we have the blue and yellow flag, national flag, blue being the sky, yellow being the cornfields, the wheat fields rather. In between them is the icon from the Kiev Cathedral, the big cathedral, Ukrainian cathedral, Orthodox cathedral in Kiev, and that's in the cupola. That's the icon, the sort of the mosaic in that. Bottom left, we have a poet there, very famous poet, Taras Shevchenko, who wrote in Ukrainian poems in Ukrainian, and because of his opposition to the Tsars, ended up in Siberia with some of his colleagues. But he's regarded as a very famous Ukrainian poet. In the middle, underneath the icon, sort of the cupola, is the Gelder rose. This is the Gelder rose flower, the tree, and the Gelder rose is very prominent in Ukrainian literature and poetry and songs, and it's often associated with home, Ukraine. Ukraine as a woman. It has that symbolism of Ukraine. And in the bottom right, it's a new one, the vodka Zelensky, just recently on the market. I think we probably have Zelensky beers now, but I thought I'd show that one again. Okay, it's a British product, vodka Zelensky. Next slide, I think is that it? That's it.